Chag Sameach. Ozzy's joining a little bit to help out and to visit the beautiful display here. That's just absolutely incredible. I wanted to share a Mishnah as our little bit of learning today, rather than a traditional Devar Torah or sermon, something a little bit lighter. But first, just an observation about our community right now in this holiday. It has been so incredible, yesterday and today, the tremendous participation in this festival of Sukkot, and then on Sunday, all those who came to build the sukkah, to decorate the sukkah, and then, of course, looking around our community over these chagim, shaking our lulavs and etrogs together. It's been such an incredible holiday of opting in. And I have to share that this year, more than any year, according to Rabbi Elitsky, in his years or my years here at Bethel, more people than ever ordered lulav and etrog. And maybe because of when we started advertising the order form, but I actually think there is a renewed spirit and renewed desire to participate and to opt into this holiday. And with that in mind, I want to share this Mishnah from Sukkot, from the second parak, the second chapter, and it's Mishnah 8. So we start out with a restriction. Nashim v'avadim uktanim p'turim min hasukkah, meaning women, slaves, and minors are exempt from the obligation to dwell in the sukkah. So this would not be obvious from the verses in the Torah. In the Torah, it says that all of Israel shall dwell in Sukkot for 7 days, and you would think everybody should take part in this. So what does it mean that there are certain classes of people that may be a rabbinic term, patur, or exempt from? It doesn't mean that it's forbidden to dwell in a sukkah. It doesn't mean that they're not allowed to. It means that they're exempt. Can someone tell me what you think that might mean? And I'm only here for the purposes of the mic, so I'll try to hear you as best I can. Aviva, what does it mean, patur, or exempt? Yeah, say it one more time, sorry. Yes. Exactly. So there is a certain category of Jewish law that applies to certain people, women, slaves, and minors often. And anyone who went to JTS maybe confirm or deny this. I heard there was a band that used to play at JTS. There was a group of students. They called themselves Women, Slaves, and Minors. I don't know if that's true. I always heard that. I thought it was very funny. So women, slaves, and minors, in general, although not always, but in general, are patur or exempt from certain positive time-bound mitzvot. That is, mitzvot that are dues, like dwell in the sukkah, and that are for a specific time. And the reason for that, why would they be exempt? Because these were certain people, women, slaves, and minors, who the rabbis believed didn't have their own control over their own time, their own reshut. And so if your time is not your own, then to be given this other obligation when you have another master, whether that is a husband or an owner or your parent is the master over the child, and they're getting conflicting obligations at the same time or conflicting orders. I want you to do this, but you also have this obligation from God. An act of kindness or compassion was the rabbis to not put certain groups in that position of having to decide whose mitzvot to follow. And so oftentimes women, slaves, and minors are exempt from certain positive time-bound mitzvot. So many exceptions to this. So many exceptions to this, like hearing shofar and Megillah, women are equally obligated in. But this is one example of patur. So not asur, it's different from it being forbidden. Nobody is forbidden, but just to say you don't need to. You don't have the same level of obligation. Now, in the conservative movement, of course, by and large, we're an egalitarian movement, and the idea of women being patur, or exempt from a mitzvah because of not having control over your own time, doesn't really apply in our movement anymore, and we have a beautiful teshuvah or a halachic response to the whole notion of women's obligations around positive time-bound mitzvot, written by Rabbi Pamela Barmash for our conservative movement's law committee. And she basically writes that women no longer have this same sort of status because, by and large, we do have control over our own time, and we don't have sort of the master relationship, fortunately, with our partners, if we are partnered. And so it's less sort of relevant. But here, women, slaves, and minors, paturim means sukkah. They're exempt. The Mishnah continues, a minor who doesn't need their mother any longer is obligated in the mitzvah. So minors, when do they take on the full obligation? When they're no longer totally dependent on their mother, maybe when they're no longer crying for them, when they're weaned. But a baby is not obligated in the obligation to dwell in the sukkah, but once he or she is a little bit older, then they are. And by the way, in the whole first chapter and up until this point, we've been getting a lot of details about all the specifications for what makes a kosher sukkah. So we're now at who's obligated and who's not, but it must be this high, and the walls coming out of this, and the schach, the roof coming out of that. Lots and lots of details and specifications the Mishnah is providing. And now all of a sudden we get this wonderful little story that's going to fly in the face of everything we've just been reading. So we get a ma'aseh or a maisa, a story, about the daughter-in-law of Shammai the elder. That is Shammai, famous sparring partner of Hillel, who was often more conservative, more strict, and usually Jewish law does not side with him. But here we get a softer side, I would say, of Shammai, and a really beautiful story of him. So there's an incident, there's a story, where the daughter-in-law of Shammai just gave birth, right before the festival of Sukkot. And what does Shammai do? You might think that the baby, is not obligated, they're patur. The daughter-in-law, of course, would also be considered exempt. But what does he do? It says in the Mishnah that Shammai removed the coat of plaster from the roof of her home, leaving just the beams, and so the roof was sort of exposed over the bed of the minor, so that the minor would have a sukkah in the home. And even though it doesn't say the daughter-in-law, she too, I want to include in this, is having the sukkah brought to her, even though she cannot go outside and participate, and the baby certainly can't go out on his own. So I think this is a really beautiful story for a few reasons, and I hope you're touched by it as well. The first is around opting in. And to say that, when we think about what do we consider our mitzvot, our obligations, what are the things we want to opt into, this is a story about opting in, and not only for ourselves, but bringing others in. So wherever we are, if there's someone who can't make it to a sukkah, or can't make it to Shabbat services, or can't make it to a particular ritual, how do we bring it to that person? How do we extend the sukkah so it's as wide and as big as possible? I think that's one of the messages we can learn from Shammai, is that message of true inclusion. And we do this a lot at Bethel, of course, and just one example of how we did it this past holiday that I want to highlight is when Talia Feldman, our amazing teen program coordinator, along with some teens, baked honey cakes for members of our community who are homebound or ill or recovering from surgery, and they couldn't make it to Rosh Hashanah services. And adults as well participated in that along with Talia and the teens. That was one way of extending the holiday for those who could not be here, in the same way that Shammai's daughter-in-law and newborn son wouldn't be able to make it to a sukkah. Rosh Hashanah was brought to them. That's one. Another message that I take from this is around when life conflicts with Jewish law. So Jewish law says that women, slaves, and minors are exempt, and then we get a story where Shammai Dafka builds a sukkah, and it's not kosher, it's not a real sukkah, but he wants to bring some of the holiday to someone who ordinarily wouldn't have been able to participate. So we can probably think of a lot of examples in our life when we want to live up to whatever Jewish law might be demanding of us, but then there's a value that conflicts, or a situation that comes up, and we're not going to do it the way Jewish law is asking of us, and we have many precedents for that in rabbinic tradition. Want to offer one example from myself that was a really big challenge when life and law conflicted, but I feel good about my choice. When I was doing a chaplaincy program in rabbinical school, there was a family, it was around 2 in the morning, I was doing an overnight shift at Stanford Hospital, and someone passed away. And they happened to be a Jewish person, and I happened to be the chaplain on staff that hour. And it was fortuitous that I was a rabbinical student to be there, because they really wanted someone who was Jewish. We're not a particularly observant family, and there were about 5 relatives, I want to say, who came to the bedside after their loved one passed away, and they asked me, can we please recite Kaddish, the mourner's Kaddish, which traditionally, and under Jewish law, we would only recite after the loved one is buried, and of course in the presence of 10 Jewish adults. Neither of which was the case. The deceased person was lying before us, and we were maybe 6 people in the room. And I was faced with this conflict. Do I follow what Jewish law says, or do I follow my heart and follow the value and see the people in the room and what they needed to do? And I recited Kaddish for them. And they were not individuals who could recite Kaddish. They didn't know the words in any event, but I recited it, and I really wrestled with that afterwards. But I believe that it was the right thing, and sometimes we have to side on our side. It would be great if Jewish law always comported with our values and with every situation, but it doesn't, and we have to make decisions. So like Shammai, who knew what the law was, but also knew how important it was to bring as many people and his family into the sukkah as possible, he sided on the side of inclusivity of that value. And those were my 3 points I wanted to make. That we extend the sukkah, we bring ritual to everyone, that when life and law and our values conflict, sometimes we side on one, sometimes the other. Sometimes we make up, how we're going to make them come together and some kind of harmonious way of how we live Jewish life. And the third point is that we opt in, that even if we feel exempt from something, we take a chance and we try something new. We've never, gotten a lulav and etrog before, like in our community, and so many chose to this year, that we look for opportunities to opt in, and especially on this holiday. So I want to wish everybody a Chag Sameach, one of inclusivity and of opting in, and of most of all rejoicing in this festival. Chag Sameach.